Welcome to Mission Majjhima, Ajahn.
Ajahn.
So tell us about Majjhima Nikaya 47, the Vīmaṁsaka Sutta, the Inquirer.
Okay, so this is a really interesting sutta which talks about how one should investigate a teacher, specifically should investigate him, the Buddha himself, and what one should base one's faith on, one's sense of faith on, not just from blind belief, but actually looking deeply at a spiritual teacher. So great advice, both in the time of the Buddha, for the Buddha himself, and for us today. How do you judge a teacher? And so the Buddha says that for one who doesn't know how to read the minds of others, like specifically, like the psychic powers, one should investigate, should look. And how should they look? They should investigate in 6 different ways. So one should come and follow a teacher and watch the teacher and observe, are there any defiled states in this teacher that you can observe by vision, so seeing what they do, or hearing their teacher? Are they any defiled mental states? And when one investigates the Buddha, they'll see that, no, there aren't defiled states. Next question is, are there any mixed states? So they've got good intentions and bad intentions mixed up. But when one investigates the Buddha or a good spiritual teacher, they say, oh no, there aren't, or an ideal spiritual teacher, there aren't mixed states. It's just wholesome mind states, kusala, wholesome mental states. Third question is, are there purified mental states in this teacher? And when one investigates the Buddha, he says, yes, there are these wholesome mental states that a student can see, observe visually, and can hear through listening to the teachings. The fourth question that one asks is, have these wholesome mental states been attained for a long time, or are they only recently attained? And when they look at the Buddha, they say, actually, no, he's been doing this for a long time. So we can ask about this about our teachers that we might think about studying with. The next question is, has a teacher attained fame and not been corrupted by all the possible corruptions that can come from getting gain, honor, and praise? And one investigates the Buddha, he says, yes, there are, because he's an inspiring person, he does have this renown and people do support him, but he hasn't been corrupted like that. He doesn't exalt himself and disparage others, which is so common, a real danger of praise and renown. And the final question that one investigates with a spiritual teacher is this person behaving in a morally proper way out of fear, or is it because they've actually destroyed the roots of sensual craving that might cause one to act in an inappropriate way? Are they acting based on fear, being moral because of fear, or because of deep insight, which has undercut the roots of things? And when investigates the Buddha, you say, it's not from fear. They've just have no longer any desire to act in a corruptive way. And then finally, at the end, the Buddha gives a really fascinating, beautiful picture of what faith can be for a wise person, saying, when anyone's faith has been planted, rooted, and established in the Tathagata through these reasons, terms, and phrases, his faith is said to be supported by reasons, rooted in vision, firm. It is invincible by any recluse or Brahmin or God or Mara or Brahma or anyone in the world. So that's the type of faith we're inclining towards in Buddhism. It's not blind. It has reasons come about through investigating. So, Ajahn, what do you find interesting about this sutta?
There's a lot here. One is, as you said, the kind of language around faith, or saddha, confidence in Buddhism, and just this humility and care, where the Buddha really, encourages us to investigate very carefully and systematically a teacher before we take them on. I know in the Tibetan tradition, Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo has said, they encourage people to investigate a teacher for 12 years, and it's a long time, but this sense of very systematically seeing, okay, are there the dangers of gain, honor, and praise? Are there mixed states? And then one I find so interesting is, are they restrained through fear or not through fear, as you noted? And the way that one sees whether they're restrained through fear or not is by seeing whether they dwell alone or amidst others, if they laud themselves and disparage others. And I find this just a really important psychological pointing by the Buddha to how we often crystallize the self by pushing against others and by contrasting ourselves with others. And it's very visible at the beginning of practice for many people is you embark on the path and there's a lot of selfing initially. You're trying to crystallize a new sense of direction and self. And often it's very hard not to contrast this new path against those you used to know, those you're kind of, using a bit as a foil for a new path you might have found. And just the Buddha pointing to that's how you tell if someone's restrained through fear, is if they're disparaging others and lauding themselves, and the beauty of a path which doesn't include that. And, in Majjhima Nikaya 39, we spoke about how there's an addendum to almost every footstep on the gradual training, or many of them, where one does not disparage one's others and laud oneself based on that good conduct or right livelihood, etc. And it's like the Buddhist J stroke. If you've paddled a canoe, like you stroke, you get your forward momentum, you keep good sila, but then you keep the paddle in just a little longer to keep the canoe from swerving. And that's am I using this as a source of conceit, or am I able to really put down that comparing mind and just hold this for its own sake? So I find that very powerful, actually. The next thing that I think is worth pointing out is the fact that the Buddha, after one has investigated through those 6 means you spoke about, they then just ask the Buddha directly, are there mixed states in you? Are there defiled states in you? And then they go through how the Buddha answers, no, the Tathagata does not have these states in them, or the Tathagata has only bright states. They are my pathway and my domain, but I do not identify with them. And now there does come a point where there's enough confidence in a teacher to actually give them the benefit of the doubt and actually just ask them tell me a little bit about, maybe not what your practice is, but to take their word to some extent. And I think that's a meaningful principle. Like the Buddha saying there is a point of good enough where you can begin to trust what a teacher's saying after investigating initially. The final thing to point to is just the fact that the final confidence in the Buddha is only gained once one has, and the quote is, attained a certain knowledge directly. So as in Majjhima Nikaya 95 and these other discourses, final faith in Buddhism is only gained once you've had direct experience of some level of awakening. At least that's how that phrase is often interpreted. And just that beauty of, there's all these surrounding articles of faith, all these important structures we build our practice on. But in the end of the day, what is your firmest foundation of faith, and when you can really assert with a lion's roar, I have confidence in this, is when you've touched the Dharma yourself. And I just find that very humble and a powerful grounding for these assertions. So, Ajahn, what else would you draw out of this discourse?
Maybe just a few more things is something which we find here and in just so many suttas in the Pali Canon, is just here one discerns, or one has heard the Dhamma with its dark and bright counterparts. The Theravada Dhamma is not a non-dual path. The Buddha does talk about wholesome and unwholesome, and does talk about, that one inclines towards the wholesome and one abandons the unwholesome. And that's great because it allows for morality. And I feel like this really does tie in with judging a teacher. There are other spiritual traditions which really do just talk about turning a blind eye to the teacher. Don't do as the teacher does, but do as the teacher says. Whereas in Theravada Buddhism, hopefully in any kind of Buddhism, you can do both as the teacher says and as the teacher does. Hopefully, we all want to find teachers who are trustworthy, moral, and hopefully moral not out of fear, but because they really have undercut inclinations to do anything immoral. One other thing is just the description of someone who is wisely investigating, and it points to this distinction between fault-finding versus just wise discernment. So one interesting phrase or interesting saying that I heard recently is that fault-finding is a minimum wage job. Basically, that oftentimes when we start a spiritual path, we might think that we're being very intelligent because we can fault find with others, and just giving full vent to our, not only do we see faults, but we hold ourselves up, as you were pointing to. And here the Buddha says that a wise investigator, they do see, faults in other people, but they don't despise anyone because of that.
So Ajahn, what's the word of the week?
The word of the week is Vimamsa. Vimamsa, which means discrimination or investigation, and it's one of the 4 iddhipadas, these bases for success. And it's just, there is this place for looking deeply in the Buddha's teaching. So,
well, thank you, Ajahn. We'll see you all, if you're watching this on a Sunday, hopefully in about a few minutes on Zoom, and otherwise next week from Majjhima Nikaya 48. Ajahn.